The galaxy was quiet for centuries, ruled by the great fleets of the Valorian Alliance. Their warships were massive, bristling with weapons, and feared across 1,000 star systems. When the small human vessel appeared at the edge of the Andros sector, no one took it seriously. Its size was laughable compared to the towering battleships of the Valorian fleet. To Commander Kayla, a decorated war leader of her people, it looked like a toy drifting into a storm. She smiled at the thought of how quickly it would be torn apart. Her bridge crew fed her data from the scanners, but she barely paid attention. The humans were a mystery to most of the galaxy, their technology underestimated, their history dismissed. She had heard stories of Earth being a dangerous death world, yet to her, nothing in the known universe could match the firepower of Valorian ships. She leaned back in her command chair, her glowing eyes fixed on the small blip on the holodisplay. Confident the battle would be short, on the human ship, Captain Elias Vance stood in silence, watching the enormous fleet in front of him. His crew moved quickly, hands darting across control panels, their faces calm but alert. Elias knew what they were up against. The Valorians had numbers, armor, and weapons that could reduce moons to dust. But his ship was not built for a direct slugging match. It was something else entirely. He touched the console, bringing up systems that no Valorian had ever seen before. The Valorian flagship sent a wideband transmission. Kala's voice carried across the void, dripping with confidence and mockery. She told the human captain to surrender before his fragile craft was obliterated. She called his ship a spark before a storm, too weak to even leave a scar. On her bridge, her officers chuckled at their commander's words. The human reply came only as a calm acknowledgement, no threats, no anger. That lack of fear unsettled her more than she would admit. The fleets moved into range. Valorian gunners locked onto the human ship, targeting systems calculating hundreds of firing solutions. Kayla gave the order to fire at will. A storm of plasma bolts and missile trails lit up the void, converging on the tiny craft. Every shot should have hit. Every shot should have been fatal. But none of them did. The human ship danced through. The fire like it was weaving through rain. Each movement so precise it seemed almost impossible. Her crew shouted in disbelief as targeting locks failed again and again. Their weapons were never supposed to miss. The human vessel returned no fire, simply gliding between attack waves, its movements almost taunting. Kala's amusement turned into irritation. She ordered her ships to spread out and box the human in. No matter how fast it was, she believed it could not outrun a cage of plasma fire. But the moment her fleet closed in, the human ship vanished from sensors, reappearing directly behind her flagship. Before she could react, the human ship's weapons came alive. It did not unleash a volley of random shots. Instead, each pulse of energy struck a critical point on her escort ships. One by one, Valorian cruisers erupted into silent explosions, their cores breached with surgical precision. The strikes were not just powerful, they were perfect. Every shot found its mark as if the human vessel knew exactly where to aim before the battle even began. The fleet that once darkened the stars was suddenly breaking apart under the precision of a single ship. Kala's breath caught as she realized the truth. This was not a mistake, not a lucky fluke. The human vessel was a predator, and her fleet was prey. The mocking smile she had worn earlier was gone. For the first time in her long career, she felt the cold weight of fear as the human ship drifted closer, its weapons still locked on, ready to finish what it had started. The silence after the first wave of destruction was heavier than any sound the battle had made. The Valorian flagship floated amid drifting wreckage, the light of distant stars reflecting off the broken hulls of destroyed cruisers. Kala's crew stared at their consoles, disbelief written on every face. No training simulation had ever prepared them for this kind of humiliation. The human ship hung there like a shadow, small and quiet, yet radiating a presence that dominated the entire field. Captain Elias Vance had not moved from his command post. His expression was calm, his voice even as he gave precise instructions to his crew. They followed without hesitation, their hands flying over controls that guided the ship with impossible grace. Every system was primed, every sensor locked on the Valorian flagship. They had not come here for sport or cruelty. This was a mission, with a purpose, and every step had been calculated before the first shot was fired. Kayla's pride was burning hotter than the fires in the wreckage around her. She was not a coward. She had fought in dozens of campaigns, defeated enemies who thought they were invincible. But this was different. Her fleet's weapons had been useless. Her numbers had meant nothing. The human ship's technology moved like something beyond their age. Even its shield signature didn't match anything in known galactic databases. She realized that the rest of the Alliance would demand answers when they learned of this disaster. She opened a direct channel to the human captain, her voice carrying both defiance and a tinge of curiosity. She asked him how a single vessel could dismantle the pride of the Valorian fleet in mere minutes. She expected arrogance, maybe even gloating. Instead, the human captain replied with a simple truth. "We don't build ships to miss," he said. His tone was flat, almost casual, but the weight of the words settled deep in her chest. It was not a boast. It was a fact. The words echoed in her mind as she tried to think of her next move. She still had enough power to fight, but something in her instincts warned her that another round would be suicide. The human ship had chosen its targets with surgical precision. If it wanted to, it could take her flagship apart in seconds. Yet it waited. The pause was deliberate, as if the human was giving her a chance to choose a path other than destruction. It was both mercy and a warning. Elias understood the effect this had on his opponent. The Valorians were not used to being spared. Their culture respected dominance, but it also demanded vengeance for humiliation. His restraint now was more dangerous than any barrage of weapons. If Kayla chose to attack again, it would be her final mistake. But if she withdrew, she would carry the story of this defeat to her people. And that story would spread through the galaxy faster than any fleet could travel. Her crew waited for orders, their hands hovering over controls, unsure whether to fire or flee. Kayla's eyes stayed locked on the human vessel. She wondered if her earlier mocking words had marked her as a personal target. She wondered if the captain saw her as nothing more than another arrogant commander to crush. Yet there was something in the way the ship held position, steady and unthreatening, that made her question her own assumptions about humans. Finally, she gave the order to hold fire. The flagship's weapons powered down, the hum of energy fading into the background. The human ship remained still, its silhouette framed by the burning wrecks of what had once been her proud fleet. The comm line stayed open, but Elias said nothing more. The silence was more powerful than any threat he could have made. In that quiet, Kayla understood the message he was sending without words. Kayla stood on the command deck, the dim glow of the consoles reflecting in her eyes. The smell of scorched metal lingered in the air from the overheated systems. She could hear the quiet breathing of her officers, each one waiting for her next move. They had seen their fleet ripped apart in moments, and none of them wanted to provoke another strike. The human ship was still there, unshaken, as if it owned the space around them. The decision not to fire again weighed heavily on her pride. In Valorian culture, retreat without fighting to the end was a mark of weakness. Yet Kayla had never been a fool. Pride could rebuild itself over time, but a destroyed flagship would leave her with nothing. She thought of the reports she would have to file, of the questions the High Council would ask. She imagined their disbelief when they heard a single human vessel had bested her fleet with perfect accuracy. On the human bridge, Captain Elias Vance watched the Valorian flagship with careful eyes. Every movement of their ship was tracked, every power fluctuation recorded. His crew was silent, but he knew they understood the situation. They had made their point, but the mission was not yet complete. This was not only about proving the power of their ship. It was about sending a message to every corner of the galaxy. A message no one would dare to ignore. Elias gave a quiet order, and the ship began to shift position. It moved in a slow arc around the Valorian flagship, not threatening, but impossible to ignore. Every sensor on Kayla's ship locked onto it, tracking its motion. The human vessel kept its weapons armed, but idle, like a predator circling prey. It did not yet choose to kill. It was both a demonstration of control and a test of her reaction. Would she try to escape, or would she stay? Kayla held her ground. She refused to give the human the satisfaction of watching her flee. Her gaze followed the ship's slow movement, analyzing every detail of its design. It was smaller than she expected, with smooth armor plating that lacked the heavy weapon mounts of her own ships. Yet she had seen the destructive force it carried. She suspected much of its true weaponry was hidden, and that every system had been engineered for speed and accuracy over sheer size. As the human ship completed its pass, Elias opened a secure transmission. His voice was calm, without a trace of mockery. He told her that the destruction of her fleet had been necessary to prevent a Valorian incursion into human space. He reminded her that humans had never sought war, but they would not hesitate to defend their own. Every word was precise, leaving no room for misunderstanding. He wanted her to remember this conversation long after the battle ended. Her officers shifted uneasily as the message played over the bridge speakers. They had expected a demand for surrender or terms of retreat. Instead, the human captain seemed to be giving them something more valuable, a warning. Kayla understood the meaning behind his words. This was not the end of their conflict, but a line drawn in the stars. Cross it again, and the next encounter would leave no survivors. It was a lesson carved into the wreckage around her. When the transmission ended, the human ship began to pull away. No escort, no covering fire, no attempt to finish them. It simply turned and accelerated toward the edge of the sector. Kayla watched it go, her hands gripping the armrests of her chair. She felt the weight of the decision she now carried. She could return to her people and tell them of the defeat, or she could twist the story to save her pride. But deep inside, she knew the truth would spread regardless of what she said. Asterisk. The Valorian flagship limped back toward the edge of the sector, its damaged systems groaning under the strain. Kayla had ordered minimal power use to avoid further failures. Fires had been extinguished, but the scars of the battle were everywhere. Crew members moved quietly through the corridors, their faces pale with disbelief. Every time they passed a viewport, they saw the drifting wrecks of what had once been their proud fleet. Kayla sat in her private chamber, replaying the battle data. She slowed the footage, watching each precise strike from the human ship. The pattern was unmistakable. Every hit had been placed with perfect knowledge of Valorian ship design. She wondered how humans had acquired such information. No spy could have mapped so many vulnerabilities. It was as if the human ship could see through the armor itself. That thought unsettled her more than the defeat. Across the galaxy, news of the battle began to spread. Merchant vessels carried whispers of a human warship that could not miss. Some called it a ghost ship, others a weapon from an ancient race. Traders exaggerated the story at every port, adding details about invisible cloaks and impossible weapons. While many dismissed the rumors, those who knew the Valorian reputation found the tale harder to ignore. If the Alliance's strongest fleet could be destroyed, what hope did lesser powers have? On the human vessel, Captain Elias Vance monitored the secure channels. His crew had intercepted several transmissions about the battle already. He knew the story was spreading exactly as intended. Fear could travel faster than any fleet, and it required no resources to maintain. His mission was to protect human space, but deterrence was always better than war. If the galaxy learned not to provoke them, Future battles might never be fought at all. Kayla received a summons from the High Council before she had even reached Valorian territory. They demanded a full report and an explanation for the loss. Her thoughts raced as she considered her approach. She could tell the truth and risk being stripped of command, or she could claim the human ship had been aided by unknown alien technology. Either choice carried danger. The Council did not forgive failure, and they valued strength above all else. When the flagship finally docked at the homeworld's orbital station, Kayla stepped out to face rows of silent officers. Their expressions were unreadable, but she could feel the weight of their judgment. She walked past them without slowing, her posture straight, her steps measured. In her mind, the image of the human ship still burned brightly. It was not just a vessel, it was a statement. And she would have to decide whether to challenge it again or learn from the defeat. Inside the council chamber, the air was heavy with tension. 12 figures sat in a semicircle, their eyes fixed on her. They asked for the truth, nothing less. Kayla began her account, speaking of the human ship's speed, precision, and uncanny ability to evade all fire. She admitted that her fleet had been unable to land a single hit. She could see the shock ripple across the chamber, though most tried to mask it. Even the oldest among them had never heard of such a thing. One counselor asked if she believed the humans had more ships like it. Kayla hesitated before answering. She told them she could not confirm it, but if they did, the balance of power in the galaxy would change forever. Another asked if the humans were preparing for war. She said no, but her voice carried doubt. In truth, she did not know the full extent of their capabilities. What she did know was that if humans chose to fight, no fleet could match them. The High Council chamber was silent after Kayla finished her account. The counselors exchanged glances, each one weighing her words. Some seemed skeptical, while others appeared disturbed. The loss of a single battle was not unusual in galactic history, but the nature of this defeat was unprecedented. A single small ship destroying an entire fleet was something that defied all conventional logic. One counselor leaned forward, his voice low but sharp. He accused Kayla of exaggerating to excuse her failure. She met his gaze without flinching and offered to share the full battle recordings. The data was transmitted, and the holographic display lit up in the center of the chamber. Every member watched as the human vessel darted through impossible volleys of fire. Every strike it returned, destroying a critical system in a single shot. The footage left no room for doubt. The room shifted from disbelief to unease. Questions began to fly. How had humans developed such technology? And why had the Valorian military not known about it before? Some suggested that the humans had discovered lost relics from ancient civilizations. Others feared that their science had simply outpaced the rest of the galaxy. Kayla stood in silence as they debated, knowing that their speculation was only scratching the surface of the truth. Meanwhile, across the stars, Elias Vance sat in the command center of his ship. The battle was already behind them, but the mission was still unfolding. Reports showed that several hostile fleets had quietly altered their patrol routes to avoid human space. That was exactly what Elias had hoped for. He knew fear would protect them better than walls or treaties. But fear was a weapon that had to be managed carefully. Pushed too far, and it could unite enemies instead of dividing them. On Valoria, the Council reached no agreement. Some wanted to send reconnaissance fleets to gather more intelligence on human capabilities. Others argued for immediate diplomatic outreach before tensions escalated further. A smaller, more aggressive faction called for a surprise strike to destroy the human ship before it could cause more damage. Kayla knew such a strike would fail. She also knew the Council's pride might blind them to that reality. After the meeting, Kayla walked through the long halls of the Council complex. The marble-like walls glowed faintly under the soft lighting, but the beauty of the place did nothing to ease her mind. She replayed the human captain's words in her head. "We don't build ships to miss. It had sounded so simple, yet it carried the weight of unshakable confidence. It was not an empty threat. It was a fact backed by absolute capability. Back on his ship, Elias received a private message from Earth Command. They congratulated him on the outcome and ordered him to return for debriefing. But there was a note of caution. While the mission had succeeded, human intelligence believed the Valorians would not let the matter rest. Elias knew they were right. An enemy humiliated so completely would either retreat to rebuild or return with greater force. Either way, this was not the end. As the human vessel set its course back toward friendly territory, its crew worked in quiet efficiency. Systems were checked, battle logs archived, and damage, though minimal, was repaired. No one celebrated. They understood the victory was not about glory. It was about survival. In the cold expanse of space, survival was the only true measure of success. And against an enemy as proud as the Valorians, survival was never guaranteed. Kayla returned to her command ship with the weight of the Council's divided opinions heavy on her mind. She had survived a battle that should have been a decisive victory for her people, and yet she could not call it survival in the proud Valorian sense. This was endurance born of restraint from her enemy, not from her own strength. Every officer on board felt it too, though none dared speak it aloud. Their pride had been cracked by a single human vessel. In the days that followed, Kayla studied every report about humanity she could access. Most of it was incomplete or outdated, painting them as a relatively new power in the galactic stage. But between the lines she saw something others ignored. Humans had a history of enduring hostile environments, surviving wars far worse than most civilizations had ever known. Their advancements were often born from necessity, and necessity had always been the truest forge for dangerous weapons. Elias Vance reached the borders of human-controlled space without incident. The ship's sensors picked up distant shadows Valorian. Scouts, perhaps, but none dared to follow too closely. Inside the command deck, Elias sat with his first officer, reviewing the tactical data from the battle. Every maneuver, every strike, and every countermeasure had been analyzed. They were looking for weaknesses, not in the enemy, but in themselves. Even in victory, Elias refused to believe they were untouchable. On Valoria, the Council's more aggressive faction began mobilizing resources for what they called a containment strike. Kayla was summoned again, this time in private by one of the elder counselors. He asked her bluntly if she believed victory was possible against humans in direct battle. Her silence was her answer. The elder dismissed the idea of open war and warned her that some within the council would ignore reason if they believed their honor demanded action. Kayla left that meeting with a new concern. She had no wish to fight the human vessel again, but if her people committed to such a path, she would not have the choice. She began assembling a smaller, specialized team to study human tactics more closely. If conflict could not be avoided, then knowledge would be their only shield. Yet in the quiet of her thoughts, she wondered if even the best preparation would be enough. Elias received an encrypted message from Earth Command. Intelligence suggested the Valorians were debating their next move and that some factions were pushing for an aggressive stance. The orders were clear: remain ready but avoid escalation. Humanity's goal was deterrence, not conquest. Elias understood the importance of this directive, but he also knew deterrence required constant demonstration of strength. If the Valorians sensed hesitation, they would exploit it. A week later, Kala's team intercepted new information about the human vessel's weapon systems. The data was incomplete, but what they found only deepened her unease. The targeting algorithms were unlike anything in Valorian databases. They adapted in real time, learning from each failed attempt until no failure was possible. It was as if the ship itself learned to hunt during battle, growing deadlier with each passing second. Against such a system, numbers meant nothing. Elias stood once more on the bridge, looking out at the streaking stars beyond the viewports. His crew worked quietly, each aware that their actions were shaping the galaxy's perception of humanity. They were not the largest fleet, nor the oldest empire, but they carried something far more dangerous than size or history. They carried the will to survive, sharpened into a weapon no fleet could match. And if the Velorians came again, they would meet the same fate as before. Kayla stood in the strategy chamber aboard her command ship, holographic maps of human territory flickering before her. The maps were filled with speculative data, much of it unverified, but the absence of reliable intelligence was itself a warning. It meant the humans guarded their secrets well. Even their trade routes and colony locations were obscured in the network, suggesting a level of operational security the Velorians had underestimated for years. Her team of analysts worked without pause, reviewing every known encounter between humans and other species. They noted patterns, small, seemingly insignificant choices in movement, weapon deployment, and communications. Kayla saw it too. Humans never revealed their full strength immediately. They probed their enemies, learned their weaknesses, and struck with precision only when the moment guaranteed success. That discipline, combined with their technology, made them dangerous beyond measure. Far from Velorian space, Elias Vance met with senior officers aboard his ship. They discussed the growing possibility of another Velorian strike. The reports from intelligence agents painted a mixed picture. Some factions in the Velorian leadership were urging restraint, while others demanded retribution. Elias believed the latter group would eventually win out. Pride was a powerful motivator, and humiliation was not something the Velorians could endure quietly. Kayla knew the pressure within the council was building. She could feel it in every coded message, every shift in orders from command. She had been ordered to prepare a fleet for a possible deep space engagement. Officially, it was a training exercise, but she recognized the signs of an imminent military move. The thought of facing the human vessel again forced her to confront a truth she had been avoiding. This would not be a battle. They could win through numbers or brute force. In a secure meeting with her most trusted officers, Kayla spoke openly for the first time since her defeat. She told them the reality of the human ship's capabilities, leaving no detail hidden. Some were skeptical, but most listened in silence, understanding that her warnings came from hard-earned experience. She urged them to think beyond Velorian pride, to focus on survival if war returned. Her words carried weight, but she knew pride was not so easily set aside. Elias reviewed the readiness reports of his ship. The crew was operating at peak efficiency, but he knew that war was not won on paper. It was won in the moments where training, instinct, and discipline met under fire. He had seen too many battles where the better-equipped side still lost, because they underestimated their enemy. The Velorians had made that mistake once. If they returned, they would not make it again. That meant the next encounter could be far more dangerous. Kala's intelligence network intercepted fragments of human communications. Most were routine, but one stood out, a coded signal indicating the human vessel had been ordered to patrol near the outer edges of Velorian claimed space. This was a calculated move, meant to show strength without directly provoking conflict. It was also a test, daring the Velorians to react. Kayla suspected the humans wanted to measure their response time and readiness without firing a single shot. Elias watched the sensor displays as his ship entered the designated patrol sector. He knew the Velorians would detect them, and that was exactly the point. This was a silent negotiation, a way of telling them that humanity was prepared and unafraid. The stars outside seemed calm, but every crew member understood the tension hanging over them. Somewhere out there, Velorian eyes were watching, and both sides knew it was only a matter of time before the silence broke. Kala's flagship emerged from hyperspace at the border of Velorian claimed space, its sensors already detecting the human vessel. It was there, as expected, moving with deliberate calm. No escort, no visible reinforcements, just the same small ship that had once destroyed her fleet. Kayla stood at the viewing platform, her eyes fixed on the distant silhouette. She knew. This meeting would decide more than her own fate. It would shape the future between their peoples. Her officers waited for her command. Some urged caution. Others whispered that this was the moment to strike. Kayla ignored both sides for the moment. She opened a secure channel to the human ship, transmitting directly to its captain. Her voice was steady as she identified herself, stating that she did not come to attack but to speak. For several seconds there was silence. Then the human captain's voice came through, calm and controlled, inviting her to state her reason. Elias Vance listened as Kayla explained her purpose. She spoke of the factions within her council, the growing push for war, and the danger such a path would bring. She admitted that she had underestimated humans before, but now she understood the truth. War would cost both sides dearly, but the Valorians would bear the greater loss. Her words carried no weakness, only the weight of reality. Elias recognized the rare honesty in her tone. The two ships held position, facing one another across the void. Crews on both sides watched the exchange. In tense silence, knowing that one wrong word could turn this meeting into a battle. Elias asked Kayla why she had come herself instead of sending an envoy. She replied that a message of survival must be carried by one who had seen the truth firsthand. If she was to convince her people to avoid war, they needed to hear it from her. Elias considered her words carefully. He had no illusions about the Valorians' pride. A single meeting would not erase the sting of defeat. But he also understood that fear, if left unchecked, could turn into reckless aggression. By speaking to him openly, Kayla was offering a chance to end the tension before it escalated. It was not trust, but it was the first step toward avoiding a war neither side truly wanted. Kayla made her proposal. The Valorians would withdraw all fleets from the border in exchange for an agreement that human ships would not advance into their territory without cause. It was not a treaty of friendship, but it was a clear line that both could respect. She did not ask for forgiveness or favor. She asked for space-time, and the chance to keep her people from making a fatal mistake. Elias agreed, but with his own condition. Any Valorian fleet crossing into human space without warning would be met with full military response. There would be no second warnings, no mercy in battle. Kayla accepted without argument. She understood that the balance between them would always rest on readiness and the will to act when necessary. This was not peace in the pure sense, but it was survival for now. As their ships turned away from one another, Kayla stood in her command chair, watching the human vessel disappear into the distance. She knew there would still be voices in the council calling for revenge, but she had faced the human captain again and left with her ship intact. That alone was a victory in its own way. For now, the war would wait, and perhaps in that time, the galaxy would learn the same lesson she had faced in the cold silence of space.